There she is. The birthday girl.
What are you doing here?
78. It's a good innings.
What's the rabbit for? I don't want a rabbit. What am I gonna do with a rabbit?
Enjoy yourself yesterday? You turned 70. You throw a party, and you don't invite your baby boy. What the fuck's that all about?
You were just a common thief. I can understand stealing, but the moles and the bashings.
Who have you been talking to?
I read something new about you in the paper every day.
Papers are papers.
I don't want a son who's a criminal, and that's what you are, Len. The older you get, the worse you get.
Ma.
And I think what you did to that poor Joy. She was your wife, for God's sake.
Fuck you, then. Ah! Happy birthday, you old bitch.
Meet Lennie McPherson, Australia's Mr. Big. He was the feared head of Sydney's underworld for over 30 years.
You're going to hell, Len McPherson!
Tonight we take you through the life and crimes of Lennie McPherson, the Mr. Big of Australian crime. Everyone knew Lennie was a criminal, but he remained untouchable for 3 decades. McPherson was a ruthless multiple murderer, a standover man who ran extortion rackets and prostitution rings. At home, he was a sadist who beat and tortured his first wife. Lennie McPherson stayed at the top of the post-war Sydney crime scene by selling out his friends and enemies to the police. Through dramatised scenes, psychological analysis and interviews, Australian Crime Stories will trace the life of Lennie McPherson from his working class beginnings to the top of the Sydney crime scene.
Lennie McPherson was not only just a lifetime criminal, but at the same time, terribly, terribly ruthless.
Happy birthday, you old bitch.
In the 1960s, anybody who challenged McPherson's empire would end up dead.
Everything was done with him on a handshake, never to be fucked around in any way, shape or form.
Lennie McPherson was the old school, and if anyone crossed him up, they were dealt with.
He was a real upfront bloke. He was cunning as a shithouse rat.
Got to go out for a bit. Take care of a little bit of business.
If you got in Len McPherson's way, he would kill you.
Lennie McPherson was a criminal with no code of honour and no moral compass. He ruled a criminal empire involved in prostitution, gambling, extortion and murder. What is not well known is that the godfather of Australian crime was a key police informant for 40 years. This made him virtually untouchable and gave him the opportunity to conduct his criminal activities without fear of prosecution.
He was always referred to as the king of Sydney's underworld. His principal lieutenant was the late Stan Smith. And of course, the other arm to the trio was George Freeman. They're often referred to as the old firm. They controlled a wide variety of criminal activity in Sydney.
Lennie McPherson was not only just a lifetime criminal and a Mr. Big, but at the same time, terribly, terribly ruthless. And that's why he rose to the prominence he did. He had no compunction in killing anyone, having them killed, and especially, just bashed up for any sort of insult or anything.
If you met him in a public place, he'd basically have everyone scatter. Any member of the public sitting down having a cup of coffee in a cafe or having a drink in a hotel would basically just run for their lives. And it wasn't just that Len was a big, scary guy. I mean, there was that. But he had the foulest mouth.
I did work for Len for a while, on and off, doing odd jobs. I never had any trouble whatsoever with Len. He was always good as his word.
Of course, they made him out a monster, and blokes who have written books about him, and, so much of it is just so exaggerated, it's a joke. But I often used to say to him, because he'd have me laughing that much, I'd say, I don't ever know how you ever got the tag, Mr. Big. You should have been just Mr. Freaking funny, I mean, he was just unbelievable. He was a real card. They break the mold and they've made blokes like him, mate,
He was a straight shooter. He was a very, and no pun intended, but he was a very, very, very astute businessman. He had connections in the best places and he had the best connections in the highest places.
McPherson ruled Australian crime for over 30 years, feared and admired by friends and enemies. He was a multi-millionaire, but that didn't impress everyone.
Lennie McPherson was the black sheep of the family. I think he felt that particularly. And when his mother organised her 70th birthday and didn't invite him, he felt even further isolated from his own clan.
You turn 70. You throw a party, and you don't invite your baby boy. What the fuck's that all about?
She was unhappy and disappointed with her son.
You were just a common thief. I can understand stealing, but the moles and the bashings.
Who have you been talking to?
And in Lennie's dark view of the world, he would have sought retribution. He would have sought to get back at those people who had harmed him. In this case, his mother.
Well, fuck you then!
We could go into the Oedipal implications of it all, but really it was a sadistic act. It was designed to make her feel as bad as possible about what she had done to him, or what he perceived she had done to him.
His mother did to him what most boys find is a very difficult thing. My elderly mother, who professes to love and care for me, who gave birth to me, says to me, "I'm disappointed in you. Not only disappointed, you're not welcome at our function." And because he couldn't reach out and strangle his own mother, he did the next best thing. He broke the rabbit's neck, and in throwing the rabbit with the broken neck back at the mother, said, "That warm child I used to be is no longer the warm child I currently am."
Happy birthday, you old bitch!
So for McPherson to violate his own mother's birthday space with an act of absolute toxicity, with the implication that I'll break the rabbit's neck and I could do that to you, means that he has no sense of real love for his mother or compassion. She was just a figurehead. He wanted to have power over her, and by her not inviting him to the party, he was vicious and savagely needing to have his revenge on her.
You're going to hell, Lennie McPherson!
Leonard Arthur McPherson was born in 1921, and he was the 10th child in the family. The McPherson family grew up in Balmain, a tough working-class suburb in Sydney. His father, William, was an honest man who found employment on the Balmain docks as a fitter and turner. He cared for his large family as best he could, but Lennie was a constant problem. In the 1930s, children could not leave school until they had reached the age of 12, but McPherson left school at just 11 years of age. By that time, he had racked up the first of a string of convictions for property offences. At 14, Lennie McPherson got his first taste of incarceration. He was sent to a boys' home on the New South Wales Central Coast. Conditions in these boys' homes were harsh. Later in life, McPherson would openly admit to suffering physical and sexual abuse at the hands of guards and the older boys.
Lennie McPherson made no secret of the fact that he was physically and sexually abused during his time at Gosford Boys' Home. He actually told people about this. He made it public knowledge. As to what impact that had on his life in future is anybody's guess. But certainly it made him a ruthless man and a violent man and a person who had little or no compassion for others.
Forensic psychologist Stephen Barron believes McPherson never recovered from his time at Gosford Boys' Home.
Male authority figures to a boy are about images we aspire to. We want to be like our dads or our grandfathers. When you're betrayed early by an authority figure that you're led to believe is there to care for you, few people get over that sense of betrayal. Many internalize it and become better fathers. Some don't become fathers. Some see authority as a necessary evil, but a small proportion see themselves as being personally betrayed, and few of them very rarely get over it.
People who are incarcerated at young ages, whether it's in refuges or boys' homes, they're at a time where they should be developing all these pro-social skills. They're not having that opportunity to. They're also being exposed to really antisocial influences from the people who are in authority, the people who should have been providing the deterrence or the correction that was, hopefully gained by placing them there in the first place.
At age 16, McPherson returned home to Sydney and took up a labouring job on the Balmain docks. The docks were a hotbed of crime. World War II had begun, but as a dock worker, McPherson was exempt from military service, which left him free to continue in the criminal world. By the time Lennie was 24, he had a substantial criminal record for minor offences. He was widely known to police.
Evening, Lennie.
Fuck! Some prick gave me up.
Oh, is that what you reckon, Lennie? And here we are waiting for you to break in, just like clockwork you turn up. Or maybe we're just a bunch of very smart blokes.
There's nothing smart about you blokes.
Oh, you may very well say that. But seeing I've arrested you tonight, and oh, by the way, you are under arrest, Lennie. I'm thinking I'm looking a lot smarter than you.
Someone's brassing me.
Oh, you're getting smarter by the minute, Lennie. Now, I can't teach you the secret of everlasting youth. I can't teach you how to be a better bloke, but I can teach you how to stay out of jail. Well, if you want to really learn, that is.
How much do you want?
Money? He thinks we want his money. Now, how are you gonna get money, then? You're the most dim-witted, retard crook that I have ever met in all my years of being in the force.
Go to buggery.
Well, this is how it works, Lennie. You work for us, and we work for you. There's nothing wrong with a bit of pilfering. It's covered by insurance. No one gets hurt. Now, all you gotta do is put someone in a frame for something tasty.
I'm not dogging for you.
Well, you had better start thinking about bail, because bet your life I'll be waiting in the next shithole you try to break into.
Wait.
Well, there you go. You're not as stupid as I thought you were. Let's go down to the station and we'll flick through a few mugshots while Constable Thompson here will brew us up a nice hot cup of tea.
I don't think I trust you blokes.
Oh, you will, Lennie. You will.
As a young man in his late teens and early 20s, Len McPherson was getting caught all the time. Mainly for traffic offences, stealing cars, break and enter. The police would know where to look if a car went missing, if a warehouse was broken into. They would come and look for Len McPherson. And that's because he hadn't realised how to play the game. After a while, the penny dropped. If I can dob in a mate, if I can inform on a bloke who was with me, or if I hear about a job, I go and tell the coppers, then they will let me off when I get involved in my own crimes.
So he went from one botched offence to another, until eventually people wouldn't work with him, because if he got caught, they got caught. And it may well be he decided that by giving people up, it allowed him to be part of the life that he led, but at the same time gave him a major part of protection.
Ray Kelly was the most famous and feared police officer in Sydney. McPherson soon became his informant.
Well, we were always told that McPherson was a police informant, and from my own experience speaking to former detectives who are well and truly retired and deceased, they validated the fact that he regularly used to supply information to a former detective inspector, the late Ray Kelly. He developed McPherson as a very valued informant.
I can't teach you the secret of everlasting youth. I can't teach you how to be a better bloke, but I can teach you how to stay out of jail.
Lennie McPherson, of course, as time developed, he became close to Ray Kelly, and Ray Kelly, as I said, in my early days, he was the gun detective. Any underworld murders that took place, Ray was in charge of investigations. We all looked up to Ray. He was a tough guy. He was known as Gunner Kelly. I think he let a couple of shots go and killed one or two over the years.
Ray Gunner Kelly and Len McPherson both rose to prominence, one as a police officer, the other as a criminal, at around the same time. And they both stayed top of the heap, really, for the next 25 years. But their relationship and the quality of the information that McPherson was able to provide Kelly made Kelly a hero within the police force. And in turn, the quid pro quo to that was, I will turn a blind eye to your many and manifest crimes, Len.
There's nothing wrong with a bit of pilfering. It's covered by insurance. No one gets hurt. Now, all you gotta do is put someone in a frame for something tasty.
Becoming an informer was a dangerous move for McPherson. It would keep him out of jail, but if the criminal world found out, it could get him killed.
The rule of thumb, the highest rule of the con code was basically don't rat, don't inform, don't tell on. And so for McPherson to go and fly in the face of all the rules, he must have had a great deal of confidence that he wouldn't be going to jail over this, that it would never catch up with him, that there would never be a consequence to that behavior.
At the end of the Second World War, McPherson was sent to jail for multiple stolen goods convictions. He was finally released from prison in September 1946, and at the same time, new forces arrived in Sydney. One new player, Frederick Anderson, wanted to be the top dog. McPherson was just another mid-level crook when they first met, but Anderson could see a ruthless streak in the big man. In the 1950s, Anderson took McPherson under his wing. The two men were keen observers of the American mafia. Anderson marvelled at their power, and he knew that it came from establishing an organised structure. Journalist Bob Bottom is an anti-corruption fighter who has traced the origins of organised crime in Australia.
We in Sydney had in those days backstreet baccarat. That went out, in came shopfront casinos. We had laneway prostitution, and out that went, and in came massage parlours. Out went the Friendly Fred running SP, from the local pub, and in came syndicated SP betting. They operated under protection, and the person since nominated as Mr. Big, Lennie McPherson, but more particularly above Lennie was one character who'd come through from the Razor Gang days, through the war years and everything, a man called Frederick Charles Paddles Anderson. If anyone could be nominated as a boss of bosses, he was it.
Frederick Paddles Anderson was the architect of organised crime in Australia. Anderson had looked at the structure of organised crime in the United States, essentially through the mafia, and believed that with some changes, it could work here. The plan was to basically run everything, run every illicit racket, prostitution, gaming, sly grog, and bring it all under one organisation with one man at the top and a number of people running each of these rackets directly below them.
McPherson was becoming one of the most powerful men in the Sydney underworld, but at home, things were different. It's often said that McPherson used violence in a calculating way, always to advance his interests. But this was not the case with Dawn Joy, his long-suffering first wife.
I was trying to do something special.
What do you mean, special?
I was trying to do crackling the way you like it.
Bugger the crackling! I want my dinner, you stupid woman!
Give it 45 minutes and you'll love it.
I could starve to death before then! 45? There's your 45!
So what have you been doing all day?
Sitting around eating chocolates. What do you think I've been doing? What have you been doing? Or should I say, who have you been doing?
I have been working all day so you can live in this nice house, busting my ass, and all I ask is my dinner on that table when I get home.
Pa,
go for a little drive, shall we? Come on. Come on.
Len! Len! Len!
I'm gonna tear you in half, you bitch!
Len, please!
Keep it down, McPherson! Fuck!
It was a relationship that was really never going to prosper. Joy had really no idea that her husband was a committed criminal. However, in his early 20s, he was sentenced to a 3-year stint in jail. While he was away, he became convinced that she had been unfaithful to him. And for a man like McPherson, with the ego that he had, this was completely unacceptable.
What have you been doing? Or should I say, who have you been doing?
I have been working all day so you can live in this nice house.
He tied one of her legs to a tree, he tied the other to the back of his car, and he threatened essentially to pull her apart.
I'm gonna tear you in half, you bitch!
Len, please!
He didn't do it, but he continued the violence against her. Such were the extent of her injuries that a charge of attempted murder was going to be placed on Lennie McPherson. However, with the involvement of willing police officers, in this case Ray Gunner Kelly, a settlement was negotiated.
Now, you two, we're going to sort it out. All right? There'll be no more trouble. Now, Lennie, this is the way it goes. Sell the house, give her half, and she pisses off, all right? And you leave each other alone. Do you want the fucking ring back? Yes. Well, you make sure you give it to him, all right? Is that understood? Okay.
Fortunately for her, she left Lennie's embrace and went on to live a relatively normal life.
Forensic psychologist Anita McGregor believes McPherson's treatment of his first wife may be symptomatic of a psychopathic nature.
With the concept of psychopathy, if McPherson in fact was a psychopath, that he would probably have difficulty in forming attachments to anybody, probably women especially, in that he often would probably have seen connections within a power continuum rather than a connection continuum.
Half the time you don't come home and I have to throw it out!
So women were something to be dealt with. Women were something where you had to teach them lessons occasionally. Those kinds of things where again, his behavior wouldn't have been generally how people see each other in relationship, where there would be compromise and discussion and those kinds of behaviors. In psychopaths, we generally don't see that behavior.
Lennie may simply have been someone who didn't like people, wasn't very likable, who was manipulative, who was a con artist, who made profit from other people and didn't really carry a relationship all that well. And sometimes, if you're not too bright about how you do it, people see you for who the person you are, how you are, and you get excluded. So Lennie may well have become more violent because he didn't get the respect, the deference, the status that he felt he was entitled to, but others of his kind did by virtue of who they were and what they did.
McPherson committed as many as 10 murders in the 1960s to further his criminal empire. Yet many believe that the vicious assault on his first wife, Dawn Joy, was his most depraved. But once again, his police contacts ensured he didn't face the consequences of his actions. Through his growing contacts in the underworld, McPherson established himself as a bludger, street slang, for a man who lives off the earnings of prostitution. He kept mistresses among the working girls and sired children that he totally ignored. Despite McPherson's expanding criminal empire, his value to the police as an informant kept him out of the courts.
Lennie McPherson had this ongoing relationship with Kelly. There'd have been no fee, there'd have been no amount of money paid. It would have been just part of their relationship. It was the same with me later on. You knew that you could go and talk to somebody and they would give you information if they had information that you wanted to hear. They wouldn't bullshit to you.
All along, Lennie would inform on his opposition. He would sometimes even inform on some people who had previously been within his outfit that he wanted to get rid of. But when it came to talking to him, he would never say anything at any stage to put himself in. And in fact, he's appeared before various inquiries, including royal commissions. He just played them on a break. He would pop out a few smart remarks, but no one could ever pin him. He wasn't just a rough crook. He was a very smart man.
Lennie was locked up and charged every 3 months of his life until 1953, when he started informing on his mates. And then after that, well, he didn't get pinched for 40 years.
On the 19th of December 1965, Ronald Ryan and Peter Walker escaped from Pentridge Prison in Melbourne. During the escape, a guard was shot dead. As the Victorian police closed in, they fled to Sydney. Ronald Ryan sought out McPherson, believing the big man could assist him in getting out of the country. McPherson agreed to help Ryan and organised a meeting at Concord Hospital. Ryan waited for him, but McPherson didn't show. Instead, more than 100 police officers swooped in on the scene and arrested Ryan and Walker.
If criminals came to Sydney and they wanted some sort of protection themselves, they'd go and see Lennie. Well, when two criminals from Melbourne came up here, they went to see Lennie, and of course one of them was Ronald Ryan.
Ryan and Walker escaped from Pentridge, and of course the heat was on them on Sydney to bring about their arrest. Information was that they were here, and Lennie McPherson played a big part, of course, in bringing about their successful arrests.
So Lennie told Kelly. Kelly went out and arrested them. And of course they were extradited back to Melbourne. Kelly was made a hero, and Ronald Ryan became the last man hanged in Australia. And Lennie wasn't publicly given the credit, but that's the sort of thing he did do.
Ronald Ryan was convicted of murdering prison warder George Hodson after an escape bid from Melbourne's Pentridge Prison in December 1965. Ryan was hanged on February the 3rd, 1967, after having his execution postponed twice.
McPherson was useful to someone, and that usefulness kept him alive. Because if someone else had shot Ryan, there's a good chance he would simply have disappeared and woken up in concrete shoes somewhere or in pieces at the airport and the beach. So I suspect he was useful. I suspect his currency was sufficient enough that someone wanted him to be kept alive.
As a valued source of information to police, Lennie McPherson was given the green light. He could commit his crimes with virtual impunity. His power grew, and he gathered around him a group of violent men who were happy to assist him in his crimes. His mentor Anderson had taught him that those who didn't comply or threatened business had to be eliminated. McPherson's wedding to his second wife Marlene provided him with the ideal opportunity to take out the competition.
Stan said you needed to speak to me.
That's right, my lovely. I've got to go out for a bit. Take care of some business. You can hold things down here for me, can't you?
Len?
All right. I'm sorry. But business is business, you know that.
How long will you be?
Only an hour. Back before the speeches, I promise.
Ben?
Yeah.
Of course, dear. I understand. Have fun. And stay safe.
Yeah. There you go, Len. We'll see who the toughest man in Sydney is now, eh? Not him. Let's go. Stupid prick thinking he could hide out with a hooker. Wonder why she gave him up. I don't know. Glad she did, but. Hey, wait up. Is that him? Well, look at that. Looks like we're doing this on the street. Hello, pretty boy. You forget to RSVP my wedding.
You're not so pretty now, are you? See you, boys. Hello, lovey. Do you miss me?
Yes.
Of course you do. How are you? Thank you so much for coming.
McPherson was told, if anyone challenges you, you must strike hard and fast and first. And essentially that's what occurred in the 1960s. In order to secure the prostitution rackets under his name, McPherson had to go out and kill people like Pretty Boy Walker in order to secure his power.
I've got to go out for a bit. Take care of some business. You can hold things down here for me, can't you?
Len?
Well, Lennie McPherson got married for the second time in his 40s. It was only Lennie McPherson would use that opportunity to go and commit a murder. So he and his best man ducked out, grabbed their guns, drove down to the Randwick Motel where Robert Pretty Boy Walker was staying. Pretty Boy had put the frighteners on them in respect of their brothels businesses, and Lennie decided they had to make an example of this bloke.
You're not so pretty now, are you?
Lennie shot him, go back to reception, had a few beers, went on his honeymoon.
McPherson's wedding alibi was further helped by the fact that the lead investigator was his old mate, Detective Ray Kelly.
As a very young detective, I was sent out to Randwick to work on the murder of a guy named Pretty Boy Robert Walker. We were told, as the investigation went along, in its early stages, that Detective Inspector Kelly would be getting the information from Lennie McPherson, and for some reason that information didn't materialise, and to this day the crime is still unsolved.
To the uninitiated, it would seem that human life meant so little to him, he could do this and then go back and simply put on his suit or his jacket or tie and return to his previous happy existence. But think about it differently. Would the police be looking at a man who had just got married, who was at his reception, where everyone could say, no, he's been here the entire time? Would the killing have been simply a clever thing to do?
We'll see who the toughest man in Sydney is now, eh?
Not him. Let's go.
I suspect that Lennie thought it was excellent cover. And I suspect in that case, he would never think that people would suspect him because he just got married.
This is a very, very criminal mind. You see, there are no boundaries. There is no respect for institutions like a wedding. So not only was he disrespectful to his wedding, he was able to compartmentalise and go out and commit a ruthless murder, of which obviously was advantaging him in the time.
Hello, pretty boy. You forget to RSVP my wedding.
It's confounding to us mere normals that anybody would be able to do that.
After the murder of Robert Walker, McPherson stepped up his efforts to control the streets of Sydney. One by one, his rivals wound up dead. Standover man Charlie Burke was next to go. He had begun to extort money from clubs under McPherson's control. Another standover man, Robert Steele, was shot and killed. Like Burke, Steele had threatened McPherson's standover rackets. Brothel owner Joe Borg was killed with a car bomb. His death meant McPherson's extortion rackets in the prostitution industry no longer had any competition. While Lennie McPherson didn't personally commit all of these murders, he most certainly ordered them.
Well, Lennie McPherson's business empire revolved around threats of violence, standover tactics, whether it was an illegal casino, a leagues club, making money from poker machines, the construction industry. You had to pay Lennie in order to continue on in your business. You're basically paying protection money against Lennie coming around and sorting you out. Sometimes he did the jobs himself. Sometimes he would use people like Stan the Man Smith to help him along the way, a particularly wily character who would have been responsible for the deaths of as many as 15 people in his life.
Along with Lennie McPherson at the time, in wiping out opposition and whatnot. It was a group that Lennie dominated, but it included Stan the Man Smith, and they really did. Those two in particular murdered their way to the top.
Lennie McPherson's major ally was George Freeman. Freeman got his start in the caper from Lennie McPherson. Before that, Freeman was just a thief. He was a shoplifter. McPherson said, "You know what you're doing with the horses. Why don't you come along and start SPing for me," and so forth. And that's where Freeman's empire built, largely with, under the aegis of Lennie McPherson.
Every time something comes along, they say to him, you know, McPherson, they say, "You know Smith and Freeman."
But wouldn't it be easier for you if you didn't associate with them? Then you wouldn't have this problem.
We don't associate together. We know each other. There's a little difference. Listen, but if they did ring me up tomorrow night and said, "Would you like to come for dinner?" I'll say certainly.
It was a loose coalition rather than a gang. They got together rarely. It was rare to see them together. But they all looked after each other's interests and protected one another against any threat that might come along.
Competition had thinned, but there was one man that stood in McPherson's way, the gunman and murderer, Raymond Ducky O'Connor. McPherson had employed the freelance hitman services, but O'Connor refused to exclusively join McPherson's team. This led to a standoff, with O'Connor and McPherson threatening to kill each other. McPherson called O'Connor to a meeting in a Sydney nightclub called the Latin Quarter. O'Connor agreed, thinking that the crowded club would provide him with protection from McPherson.
It's a really simple thing I want done, all right? And it better be... Too bad, Indra. Quack, quack, quack.
Oh, sorry, mate, sorry.
As Lennie sort of emerged and became powerful, one of the things he set out to do was not only to wipe out someone who might be a competitor, but get rid of their henchmen. One of the henchmen of those days was a man called Raymond Ducky O'Connor.
Ray Ducky O'Connor was a madman, really. I mean, McPherson had fueled his madness by keeping him as an assassin, but they'd fallen out. O'Connor wanted his own slice of McPherson's empire, but McPherson would never let that happen.
Ducky O'Connor, Ray O'Connor, he was a ruthless, dangerous, mad individual and who incurred the wrath of his own kind and paid the penalty.
A feud between O'Connor and McPherson bubbled away for a while until McPherson called O'Connor into the Latin Quarter nightclub on the basis that they would discuss a peace, try and work something out.
We know that Lennie McPherson was there. We know that there were two policemen there. They popped in to obviously just see what was happening in the Latin Quarter. It was always fairly dark in there. I'd been in there many times myself, popping in the same as his other two blokes had.
And O'Connor's there with a thick overcoat. He's clearly concealing a weapon. McPherson, my understanding is, was unarmed, but his henchmen weren't. The lights went out at the Latin Quarter for no more than a minute.
And of course, Ducky O'Connor was found on the floor dead. Some would say it was murder, foul play. I really believe it was probably justifiable homicide.
O'Connor's gun was found afterwards, and it was the gun used in his murder. It was called the fastest gun in town because it had dropped to the floor, and by the time it was picked up by detectives, there wasn't a fingerprint on it.
The rumour was one of McPherson's henchmen lifted the gun from O'Connor's pocket, then passed it to McPherson.
And Lennie blatantly shot him at the table and dropped the gun with a couple of New South Wales policemen sitting at a table just across from it. No one saw anything, no one got charged. It was just fairly typical of the day.
And McPherson thought he may have been charged with the murder, but that was the risk he was prepared to take. To iron out this bloke, another competitor gone, and his position in the Sydney crime scene unrivaled.
With the death of Ducky O'Connor, McPherson became an unstoppable force in the Sydney underworld. When his mentor Frederick Anderson died in 1978, McPherson finally took over as the undisputed king of Sydney crime. During his time at the top, Lennie McPherson survived 3 royal commissions and numerous coronial inquests, examining the fate of many of his victims. But eventually the police officers that had kept him on the streets moved on, which left McPherson unprotected for the first time in almost 3 decades. A new crime-fighting body, the National Crime Authority, had McPherson in its sights. Phone taps of conversations revealed McPherson conspiring to bash and break the arm of a former business colleague. McPherson was convicted in 1993 and sentenced to 4.5 years in jail.
The last thing that happened to Lennie was that he was actually targeted by the National Crime Authority at the beginning of the 1990s. And they couldn't get him on organised crime matters, but when they targeted him, they picked him up on phone taps or organising the bashing of a man.
Well, Lennie and some of his business associates, they were involved in the business of importing distilled drinks, spirits, what have you, bourbons, whiskies. They only had one brand that was worth anything in terms of sales, but one of the partners decided he was just going to take that and run with it. He negotiated the rights himself and legitimately and legally decided he was going to distribute that particular brand. And when Lennie got wind of it, he sent a couple of his boys around.
A court has been told that Sydney identity Lennie McPherson paid $20,000 to have a man's arm broken.
The Crown alleges McPherson engaged 4 men in all to beat up a former employee of one of his nephews. The nephew's company, Kentucky Importers, had the sole Australian rights to Jim Beam bourbon, worth $26 million a year.
Electronic surveillance were able to record McPherson organising the bashing of a businessman that he had been associated with.
The NCA claims to have tapes which support their case against McPherson. They alleged 2 weeks before the bashing, he told Barlish, "I'm telling you there's 20 grand and I don't want $1, otherwise I'd be in it."
One of the quotes off the phone taps has Lennie ringing actually a henchman who's had done some murders for him before. He brags how the blokes had broke his arm and bashed his head in. You know, just sort of like normal sort of chortling, you know, conversation, but no compunction whatsoever.
McPherson was charged with ordering the bashing, but fought with everything he had to stay out of prison.
McPherson had a terrible fear of dying in jail, and that he would do anything that he could to avoid that. For a long period of time, he pretended that he had Alzheimer's disease. His lawyers would seek appeals on the basis of compassionate grounds. And so Lennie, for a number of years, went through this act of stumbling his way around courtrooms, forgetting who he was.
My wife went to Alzheimer's and learned all about it so she could watch me. She knows that I am slowly deteriorating. She told me, "You don't want to put them through it, because you see what I know what's happened to my brothers. They're just nothing. His sister's dead. No one wants to know you."
Sociopaths absolutely adore being in a position of power. However, when they no longer have that, they're very, very good at playing the victim, where it's all about poor me, because it's never been their fault, of course, in their own mind. So then they go into this new compartment of, I'm the victim, it's all your fault, and you should feel sorry for me.
Are you frightened of going to jail?
Well, not really frightened of going to jail, but I think I'll die there.
I think I'll lose my memory there, and that's what I'm frightened of.
Lennie McPherson entered jail as a 73-year-old. His physical health was fading, but those close to him said his mind was as sharp as ever. Nevertheless, his lawyers made numerous efforts to have him released on compassionate grounds, saying that McPherson was suffering from Alzheimer's disease. The courts rejected it. If Lennie McPherson was suffering at all, it seems the demons of his life of crime were the cause.
Fizzing to the cops is all you've ever been glad. All you've ever been glad. Come on, Lennie. You don't want to die in jail, do you? Die in jail, do you? Die in jail.
Throughout his final years in prison, he was constantly angry and frustrated because he feared dying in jail. And that is ultimately what happened to him.
I think that McPherson, it's hard to imagine what it would have been like for him in prison, given that he'd had this lifelong behavior of informing on everybody. I'm sure he probably wouldn't have been the most popular guy there.
Fizzing to the cops is all you've ever been glad.
He probably, like most other people, would have valued his freedom and would have been happy to go and manipulate or deceive or try any option that he could to get out.
If he was tormented by demons at all, it was only the great fear of dying in jail. McPherson wanted to die in his bed, surrounded by his family, and that did not happen.
McPherson finally died as a result of a heart attack in Cessnock Jail on Wednesday, August 28, 1996.
I know talking to Abbo Henry, because he was there the night or the day that Lennie died. And he said to me when he got out himself, he said, Roger, he said, I think he really died of a broken heart. He said, I think he thought that he should have been released. He was old and decrepit in the end, and he said, I really think he died of a broken heart.
I really liked Lennie McPherson. I got on really well with him, and I actually minded him in the last part of his life in prison. But right in the end, mate, I can remember him, the day he died, and he was Len walking along and in his white outfit, ready to go over to work in the kitchen, and I said, what's wrong with you? And he just used to froth at the mouth, in anger. He was always angry. He said, I'll die in here, I friggin' know it. I said, well, be careful what you wish for.
Instead of dying with his family around him, he died in the company of crooks and criminals in a prison hospital of a massive heart attack.
To have been Mr. Big for so long, he would have felt like he was the king of the castle. There was just no other way for him.
Got to take me out after him. He was there for a long time. They ruled supreme for a long, long time, longer than any other gang.
Very successful, ruthless, and extremely reliable. And that was the sort of person that you wanted to work for and with.
If you take it from, say, 1966, which is around about the time Lennie really did the first murder, I think, in Sydney, in the gang wars of the 60s, that's 3 decades. Neither Al Capone nor any other crime leader anyone can identify in America ever survived for 3 decades.
Lennie McPherson started life as a petty criminal and ended up as the undisputed head of the Sydney underworld. For nearly half a century, he murdered, extorted, robbed, bashed, ran prostitution and drug rings, and informed on his friends and enemies. As his mother expressed at her 70th birthday, if hell exists, Lennie McPherson has well and truly earned a place there. In the end, a heart attack did what his enemies had found impossible. It took out Mr. Big.